Hey, what is up, guys? It's your boy Ed from Elite of Each. You already know. Today we're going to be doing an in-depth understanding of the Archtype Invoked. So my Alistair deck. We're going to be looking just straight into the Archtype, just the cards that make this deck. We're going to talk about all of the different fusion monsters that are invoked. We're going to talk about Alistair, the field spell, the fusion spell, and how all of that stuff works. I want there to be a little bit more of an understanding of the deck because I feel like some people don't understand the deck. I've gone through locals playing this deck for years, and I think that, yes, this deck has been around for a long time, but I feel like people just don't understand this deck just yet, and it's crazy to say that because this deck has been out for years. This is probably one of the archetypes, one of the decks engines that I actually purchased almost first as soon as I got into YuGiOh, because I got into YuGiOh before Zodiac came out. So whenever I actually joined YuGiOh, Zodiac came out, and then Invoke came out a little bit after, and then playing and learning competitive YuGiOh was very different, and this was probably one of the first engines that I actually tried out. The deck is a lot of fun. I think the deck is really good, but we're going to talk about just the archetype itself. We're not going to talk about other stuff. We're going to talk about maybe some of the stuff that plays well with this deck, stuff that you can mix, but we're not going to get into that too in deep. It's just this archetype itself. So now let's go ahead and get into the invoked deep understanding. All right, guys, so getting into the invoked archetype, of course, you got to have the Alistairs in your deck, and I believe that playing 3 Alistairs is more than necessary, and it's super mandatory to play in the deck. No matter what deck you are playing, no matter what deck you are building, if you're mixing it with Shaddoll's, if you're mixing it with Mekk-Knight or with the Dogmatica engine, I feel like 3 Alistairs is more than mandatory, because when he is normal summoned or when he is flip summoned, you know, you get to add an invocation from deck to hand. This is probably one of the cards that gets hit the most while you play. So if they have an Ash, they will Ash this. If they have an Imperm, they will Imperm Effect Veiler. If you activate Meltdown to add this guy, you will get drolled right after, which is the craziest thing. And those are some of the cards that really stop this deck. So continuing now, the most important card after the Alistair, of course, is the Meltdown. The Meltdown is actually one of the cards that just kind of gives your deck so much power, and it gives you so much of an ability for you to be able to just play this game without having to worry about almost anything. It's super cool because activating this, and you can only activate one of these once per turn. You add one of these, so you add an Alistair normal summon, then you add your invocations. So your invocations are right here. Adding invocation and then being able to resolve invocation is so good, because you can activate invocation, you banish the Alistair from your graveyard or from the field, and then by doing that, you get to then special summon whatever monster you banished because of whatever type of whatever attribute you banished. So let's say you banished your Alistair, and then your opponent had a light target in the graveyard, so you banish Alistair and you banish the light target. You get to summon out a Mechabug, which is actually pretty good. We're going to get a lot more in depth with the fusion monsters in a little bit, but what I wanted to go with this is that once you fusion summon, on the summon of your monsters, your opponent, if you have Meltdown, they cannot respond to the summon. So they can't Tori you, they can't like activate cards that are like, oh, on the summon of the monster, negate the summon or whatever. They can't Judgment, they can't do any of that, right? So you can activate Judgment to pay the cost. You can activate certain cards and pay cost, right? If it's cost, but it doesn't do anything. So yeah, also activating invocation. So invocation is the other card that you do play in, and in most decks I would recommend playing 3 of, sometimes 2 of, but invocation is so good because you don't necessarily have to fusion summon the monster from like the field or the graveyard, right? So if you have the Alistair in hand and you activate invocation, the Alistair will go from your hand to the graveyard, and now the Alistair's in your graveyard, the invocation is in your graveyard. I think the Archtype, just these 3 cards itself, it's so good. The fusion monsters really put everything else together, but these are the cards that you play, and I feel like they're kind of really good at 3 of ratios in most decks, so it's like a 9-card engine. I honestly wouldn't really cut much. There is one more card that I am going to show you guys. That one's called I think it's called like Book of something. I gotta look it up real quick because I need a translation. Give me a second. So this card is Book of the Law. This is a quick play card that allows you to be able to fusion summon one of your fusion monsters on the field for a different attribute of whatever you have on the field. So if you have a light fusion monster, you can switch it out for fire, a wind, an earth, whatever it is that you are looking for. These are some of the cards that I believe that are like actually some of my favorite engines ever. This is definitely one of my favorite decks that I've ever played, like ever. I'm currently not really enjoying the Dogmatica Invoked deck that is currently out right now with the DP and whatever. It's not really much my thing, but I think that this is really good, and I think this is really fire. Don't forget that if you fusion summon and Meltdown is up, they cannot respond to your fusion summons. I don't care if you say, on resolution of my fusion summon. No, you cannot activate anything. Oh my god, I've seen so many people get almost cheated, and I've seen so many people try to cheat by doing that. I do not care. It is the resolution of my fusion summon monster. Technically, I have to then go activate invocation to target my Alistair that is banished and return it back to deck, right? So that's whenever your opponent can respond. So if they have like a compose or anything like that, then they can activate whatever they need to, but they cannot activate anything to the summon of the monster. Please do understand that. So invocation is really good. You activate in the graveyard and you return one of your fusion invoked monsters, so your Alistair monsters, back into your deck, and then you add this to your hand. Super busted, super good. So hand, deck, you already know. Let's go ahead and continue. For your monsters, we're going to talk about the one and only link monster that this archetype actually has. This one's Alistair, the Invoker of Madness. This is a really good monster. On the field, he can actually be used to be able to be link summoned. So if you have him on board and then you activate an invocation and you don't have an Alistair, because like let's say you activate invocation and your opponent call by the graves your Alistair, or they deity crow your Alistair, whatever the situation is, right? Then you can still fusion this guy away as an Alistair, and then bring out one of your fusion monsters by banishing one of the other archetypes, one of the other attributes, right? So you can do the Alistair and then like a light target, a dark target, whatever you're looking for. But really good. Yeah, Alistair is your one and only link monster for this whole archetype. Now the next monster that I will be talking about will be the first fusion monster in our list. This is Invoked Kaliga. I don't know where my copy of Kaliga went, so I'm just gonna go ahead and show it off to you guys through the video on my phone. It says all it needs is an Alistair and a dark monster, of course. Each player can only attempt to activate one monster effect per turn. Each player can only attack with one monster during each battle phase. So the reason why this is so good is because that if my opponent attempts to activate an effect, and let's say I negate the monster effects with a strike or anything like that, they cannot attempt to activate another one, because that was the attempt to activate an effect. It was negated. It doesn't say that my opponent can only use one monster effect or can only resolve one. No, it's just they can only attempt to activate one effect, and that's it. So they attempted and they got negated, and that's it. They can only attack with one monster. So if they don't have a monster that is 1800 booty or bigger, and don't forget that you do have that Alistair in hand most of the time, right? So you'll be able to have the Alistair in hand, and let's say they swing with like a 2500 booty attack monster. You can use your one and only effect, that's the Alistair. By dropping your Alistair, your monster will now gain 1000 attack, 1000 defense as well, which is really good. I really like that Alistair can just be discarded from your hand to be able to gain 1000 to any fusion monster, as long as the fusion monster can be targeted. Most fusion monsters can be targeted, of course, with, you know, excluding Dragoon, but besides that, you don't really need to worry about Dragoon. We're gonna go ahead and continue. Now, Algaides, Invoked Algaides, this is a really good monster. Most of my invoked cards are foreign. This one happens to be Italian. Everything else is German. But we're going to talk about Algaides real quick for a second. Algaides is really good. Now, Algaides is one of those cards that actually matters if your opponent would be able to respond or not to the summon of your fusion monster. Because the thing is that Algaides on its summon, so if a monster, if a monster's summoned, special summoned, you can activate the effect and then pop a card on the field. So on Algaides is summoned, you go effect, you pop a card on the field. Your opponent cannot attempt to respond to your monster effect because that it's being on the summon of the monster. So because When this card is special summoned, you activate the effect, you pop a card. They cannot attempt to chain, let's say their own Mechabug, and then negate and banish your monster. Nope, it's just pop, and then you clear their shit, and they're out the way. Algighties is so good, so strong. Also, you can banish a fusion monster from your graveyard, an invoked fusion monster from your graveyard, and then it can gain the attack of that monster. So that's pretty good. Besides that, the card is really, really good, and I don't really use it for much besides that. But let's go ahead and continue. Mechabug. Mechabug is normally a card where you would play it as a 2-off in your deck, and it's really, really good because Mechabug, you can negate the effect, you can negate the activation effect of any one spell, trap, or monster effect by discarding the same type from your hand. And that's basically it. Mechabug is really good. It has a pretty sweet 2500 attack, 2100 booty. Most of the time I would summon in defense, just depending against who I'm playing, if I'm going first or second. And if I'm already being made to go first, I know this guy's gonna side in like lightning storms or maybe even dark rulers or stuff like that, right? So if it is gonna be a dark ruler, I'd rather just summon out in defense position. I'm sorry, a lightning storm, then I don't get my monster destroyed. But Mechabug was really good. You can legit negate and banish almost everything. So one of the rulings that I saw recently, this guy tried to cheat, and he goes, activate the effect of my monster in my graveyard. And then my buddy had said, Mechabug to negate, discarded a monster, and he goes, all right, and he tried to leave his monster in the graveyard. But Mechabug doesn't negate and destroy. Mechabug negates and banishes. So because the monster is in the graveyard, it will be negated and then banished. And the guy tried to cheat and say that, of course, the monster didn't. But okay, whatever, buddy. We're going to go ahead and continue with Purgatrio. Purgatrio being one of my favorite monsters, and if not, probably my favorite invoked monster out of all of them. Purgatrio is just so good. So good. He gains 200 for every card on my opponent's side of the field. He can attack every monster once per turn. So it's so disgusting because, like, let's say my opponents have 5 monsters on their side of the board and like 2 back rows, like a field spell and a set trap, right? I would then be able to Purgatrio attack one monster. Let's say this guy's attack right now is 2300, and he has 5 monsters and 2 spells and traps, right? So that means there's 7 cards on his side of the field times 2 is 1400. 1400 plus 2300, that will give me 3700, right? So I have a 3700 not being boosted without the Alistair just yet. So if I need to drop the Alistair on my Purgatrio, I also can. Then Purgatrio will be able to attack every single one of his 5 monsters, and that's disgusting. Like, you can't lie, that's really good. That's one of the reasons why Purgatrio is really good. I actually used to lock people out of their main deck. Not necessarily their main deck, but I used to lock people out by Mystic Minding them and then just going Purgatrio for a game because they would have like a really big board. And then I'll just set Purgatrio up and zoom, 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 I'll attack everything. But we're going to go ahead and continue. Raijin. Raijin is really good. All he needs is the wind monster. So you've had, of course, Algighties that requires a fusion monster, Mechabug that requires a light monster, and then Purgatrio that requires a fire monster besides the Alistairs, of course. And then now you have Raijin that requires a wind monster. And Raijin is really good because Raijin, he can quick effect Book of Moon any one card on the field. Yeah, it's not amazing, but with a lot of wind monsters, a lot of wind decks going around right now, this is probably a really good out to a lot of different things. Let's say you have the Alistair and the Invocation in hand. You can activate, banish one of their winds from their graveyard, because with Invoked, it's not your graveyard and their graveyard, it's our graveyards. So, you know, you get to share the graveyard with your buddy, with your opponent. But you bring out this guy, and if they have the barrier statue, which is probably stopping you from doing anything, you can just Book of Moon that. And then, if possible, to continue doing your combo, you can, of course. We're going to talk about the Earth monster next. So, like I said, Fusion, Light, Fire, Wind, Earth. He is legit a vanilla. A 3K vanilla. That's it. There's nothing else to say. We're going to go ahead and move on. For these last 2 cards, I'm actually going to pull out translations because I don't ever use them, and I think they're kind of bad. But let's go ahead and talk about them real quick. Give me 1 second. whenever I just need a translation, I always go to the, YuGiOh app, and then I just type in whatever I'm looking for. In this situation, I'm just looking for an invoked, and then here are all the cards that have anything to do with invoked, right? We're going to start off with the water. My boy, Kakaius, you already know. This is the guy who is on the invocation card. If you guys have never paid attention to that, I know my boy Rolo took forever to be able to realize that the invocation monster is actually Kakaius, which is the water monster. Nice little fun tip here. Let's go ahead and read it. Cannot be destroyed by your opponent card effects. Your opponent cannot target this card with card effects. This card can attack while face up on defense position. If it does, apply its attack as damage calculation. So I can have this monster as a 2900 booty defense. Cannot be destroyed by card effects, cannot be targeted by card effects, and then I can swing as a 1900 attack. I think that's the reason why I think that this card is so booty, because I will swing as an 1800. I think the card would be better if I was able to swing with a 2900 booty, and then I'll just sit on the defense and then just sit there and then just be like fra, and then fra, and fra, and then just run over a bunch of shit, right? Because 2900, it's a pretty big number, pretty strong booty. But 1800 just being small booty, small attack, I don't want to deal with it. We're going to go ahead and move on. So we have done water, we have done earth, wind, we did the dark right here, okay, and then fire, water, fusion monsters, right? Now, what are we missing? So this guy here says one invoked monster plus one monster that was special summoned from the extra deck. That's legit all it takes. It says must be fusion summoned with the above fusion materials. While face up on the field, this card is also a dark, a water, a earth, a fire, and a wind attribute. Once per turn, quick effect. You can target one invoked monster you control or in your graveyard, banish it. All monsters your opponent controls with the same attribute as that monster get destroyed. Does it still go down? Well, I know that that's what it is, but it doesn't really say more here. Let's see. You can target one invoked monster you control or in your graveyard, and then that's cost. Banish all the monsters your opponent controls with the same attribute as that monster. There you go. It's not destroyed, but it's banished. I think this is a good card. I just think it requires a lot of setup, because you're legit having to, let me see. You're legit having to do an invoked monster, which is not Invoker. That means it's not the Alistair, because all these other monsters just require an Invoker. So you see, see here, it says Alistair the Invoker. All of these require an Invoker. This one requires an invoked monster. So that means it has to be a fusion monster, and then another monster that was special summoned from the extra deck. So that means that that monster would probably have to be on the field or in the graveyard already, but it has to be like a Link, an Xyz, a Synchro, whatever the situation is. So you have to do 2 monsters, which you require 2 Alistairs, searching 2 invocations. I don't know, that just seems like a lot of setup to me. Don't get me wrong, I think that it's a really good card, and if you have the patience to do this and you play a little slower, that's fine. Don't take it wrong, but I just think it requires too much. But yeah, guys, this was the in-depth, understanding of the deck profile, of the deck archetype. I really think that cards or decks or engines that work really well together with this deck is Invoked, and of course you already know everybody's topping with Dogmatica. If you guys want to look into these, I will be posting videos later on in the week with these engines, archetypes being talked about as well. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed making it for you guys, and let me know what you guys think. Now let's talk about ratios. If you play that, you play 1. If you play that, you play 1 1 1 1 1 1 1. And then I would play 2 and 1. That's it. Those are the ratios. And let me know what you guys think. I'll see you guys on the next video. Take care.